So yeah, Awaken is interesting in that the music came to me first, which is not unusual, but it's certainly extremely unusual the way that this music came to me, and I've had this happen exactly one time. In the song came to me in a dream.
Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, my fine friends. You're joining me for a guest episode of the Tom Petty Project podcast. I haven't been doing intros for guests for a while, but after a suggestion from a listener and a pal, I thought adding them in again would be maybe a good idea. So this is me introing today's guest. So my second Guestember chat is with the wonderful Russell Mark from the brilliant duo The Nextdoors, as well as several other bands and different projects. We talked about shooting videos, the band dynamics of playing in a duo, especially where one half plays cello, and of course, all things Petty. Don't forget to check out the episode notes to find links to everything that Russell has going on. Sit back, relax, and enjoy.
Tom Petty. Tom Petty Project. Tom Petty. Hey, Tom Petty Project.
So obviously, as well as being a musician, it seems to me that you do have some sort of experience on the production, recording, on the sort of engineering side. So what's your journey with, let's start there and then we'll probably end up going backwards.
Great.
What's your journey with music? Like when did you get into sort of recording and sort of taking it seriously rather than just sort of playing, playing live? And
Yeah, I mean, I started playing when I was 12, 13 years old. We had a piano in the house. I'm
Yeah.
like the fifth of six kids. So,
Okay.
and they were all encouraged to take piano lessons and they didn't really take to it. So by the time I came around, they had kind of given up. So, of course, I naturally gravitated right to it and started, you know, figuring things out, playing by ear, and then got lessons. And basically I refused to take lessons unless in addition to whatever they were going to teach me, classical and reading
Yeah.
music and stuff like that it was also someone who encouraged by ear learning and that kind of thing. And from there I ended up playing with a couple of buddies in high school for all 4 years of high school, and we did all of our own recording. So they kind of developed at the same time, the musicianship, but also
Okay.
just learning about recording. And we had an old Yamaha cassette 4-track recorder for most of the time that we were
Yeah.
doing our thing. And I remember once where we went over to our buddy's place who had a Mac computer
Right.
and managed to get MIDI happening between keyboards and stuff and recording on the computer. Yeah, so and then I pursued it in college. So I made music production part of my degree program
Okay.
at University of Arizona. So that when I came out to LA, I wasn't, it wasn't like I'm going to be a rock star and the fallback plan is to do audio engineering or production. They really just were simultaneous.
When you say, I've talked to lots of people about that. You have to be a musician really to be an engineer, right? Because I don't think you can. I'm sure you can. I mean, I'm sure there are engineers out there who don't really play that actively, but it just changes the way that you hear the music and your understanding of, oh, okay, well, I have to capture this performance. This player's doing this, so I need to work around that rather than, no, just you do that. You know what I mean? Like the focus becomes different when you play yourself.
Yeah, I think it would be very difficult to engineer and to some degree to produce without playing. And I mean, right down to the fact that, if an artist says, okay, punch me in on the C chord,
Yeah.
it's super helpful even if you're not good at guitar, if you understand, if you can see the shapes
Yeah.
and you know what a C chord is. And just because you're a musician doesn't mean you recognize chords on a guitar. So having some vocabulary for all that stuff, definitely
Yeah.
helps. And I would say the same thing about just fellow musicians. It helps if the drummer, if I can say, let's go in on C,
Yeah.
and they recognize that chord. But yeah, they definitely, and I think that, I mean, it's hard for any musician not to have any sense of the sound that they're after. So yeah, I mean, the average musician might not be a recording engineer and might not think that they have those skills, and maybe in a technical sense they don't, but I
Yeah.
still think that any musician who is used to recording understands the sound they're going for and can react to, no, that's too ambient, we're getting too much room, let's tighten up the sound, just
Yeah.
that type of stuff that's part of your sound.
It also changes then. I mean, I think as a musician, it's one thing, but then as a producer or an engineer, it's different too. You'd listen to music differently too, right? You hear things that, if someone's just listening to music casually or recreationally, they don't hear, that there's that really cool little bass lick in there and it's doubled, or whatever, those little tiny things that we hear, and it's like, oh, that's so cool. And it might just be two notes in a song that it just blows your mind.
That's right. Yeah. And along those same lines, you might hear a song that's just like, under normal circumstances, you might be like, well, that's a crap song. But if you're interested in this type of thing, then it's, well, that's a crap song that sounds great. And there's all sorts of fun little production stuff going on. Doesn't make it better. It's still lipstick on a pig, but it's fun. It's another, yeah, you're right. It just enhances your listening experience.
I was talking to my friend Randy though too about it, and he says the downside of that sometimes is though that you do notice, if you're really attuned to it, it's like, oh man, that it's clipping there, or they've really sort of they've got the sort of the levels all wrong, and this, or the mix is poor, which is always a complaint about any bad album. It's like, is the mix good? Usually it's if the mix is off, everything else can't be salvaged.
Yeah, that's right. But at the same time, some of this is genre specific too. So I mean, you listen to some Ramones song and you just think that's the worst drum sound I've ever heard. And how much does it affect your enjoyment of the song? Exactly zero. So,
Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah. Well, like I said, that's when it's intentional though, right? If you're going for that garage band aesthetic, or if you're not even going for that, if that's just who you are,
right,
then it's good to capture that, right? So
yeah.
Well, I wanted to talk then, this is a good segue then into the song that you'd sent me, and one of the reasons that we ended up connecting is Awaken, the new song that you have with the Nextdoors.
Right.
Production on that is fantastic. So I wanted to ask you about, did you produce that yourself?
Yep. Yeah, sure did.
Okay.
And our whole record so yes, I'm one half of the Nextdoors, and we made a record, put it out last year called Linda Vista. So the whole thing was, essentially was a COVID project. My wife, she's Mika Larson. She's a cellist. And we've been playing together. I mean, quite literally from the minute we met each other, we were playing together. Okay. So I would drag her on. I mean, look, when when you're dating and then marry a cellist, I mean, you're not going to just let it sit in the case. That's not going to happen. So I've pulled her into, every project I've done, every artist I produce, whatever it is, I'll get her in the studio, I'll get her on stage. And then once it became clear that the COVID lockdown was not, in fact, going to be 3 weeks, then I started just putting together some songs that I thought might go nicely together for something that we could record. So that whole album was recorded just at my home studio where I'm sitting right now, which you can never tell from just one little angle. For all you know, this is a vast expanse, but it's a tiny box, and it works. There are songs where that we recorded in the living room. I set up the drums in the kitchen once just to get a slightly larger sound, but yeah, I did produce and engineer the record here at home in Pasadena, California.
Well, I mean, but Mike Campbell and Jeff Lynne and Tom Petty showed that you don't need a big studio in LA to make a great record and a great sounding record, right?
That's right. Full Moon Fever was recorded in a garage, right?
Yep.
Yeah, which is ironically the most tricked out production of all of them. Probably it's the one that sounds the least like it was recorded in a garage. So
yeah.
So you're exactly right. The expertise of the people in front of and behind the board can make or break anything. And yeah, I like that whole aesthetic of a band renting a house, somewhere, and like so many have done so famously over the years, as opposed to Capitol and Abbey Road and all that, which of course is also awesome. So yeah, thank you. No, I mean, I pride myself on being able to make things sound at least pretty good. And I beat myself up the same as anybody over, why can't I make it sound just exactly like but it's all part of at a certain point, you just don't worry about it and you hope, well, it's a pretty good song and it's a pretty good recording and
Yeah.
let that be enough.
Well, and as a hobbyist drummer myself, the first thing I
Yeah.
was just how did the drums sound? Did the drums sound really good? I always like when drums sound. The only word I can ever come up with is present. Like if it sounds like I'm sitting listening to the drummer, like listening to a live band, because live drums sound a specific way, and not the way they sound on Full Moon Fever, right? Like because that's got a very, like you
Right.
said, a produced. But that's what I
Right.
love about the drums on Awaken is that they sound. I feel like I'm just sitting across from the drummer and listening to them play, which is that's what I kind of like. That's the way I like drums to sound.
There you go. And like yours, my drum kit is about the same distance from you as my, so yeah. And he was right here. And that's the only, I think that's the only thing on the record that we recorded someone else for. Everything else we sort of did ourselves, but that one
Yeah.
was post-vaccine, and it was a demo that I had recorded years before. And it was myself playing drums, which is never a good thing. So, but I was close. I was close to letting it go and saying, it's probably good enough. And then, that little voice says like, So I did
Yeah.
have a friend of ours come in and lay down a new drum track. But yeah, for the whole record, it's kind of an interesting challenge that I didn't mix things exactly the way that I might normally, because, quote, normally in not, 99 times out of 100, if there's a cello on a track, it's a background
Yep.
instrument or semi foreground instrument, or it's part of a quartet, or it's anything like that. But truly, that cello is, I consider, one half of our sound. It's
Yeah.
essential. So to make sure that it doesn't sound like a background instrument, that means that there are certain other elements that might normally be more in the foreground that become more background, like use of bass on the record overall is pretty light. Some songs
Yeah.
don't have one at all. Some of them are mixed quite back because it competes with the cello, which is
Yeah.
not what we're after. And the drums on Awaken, I probably would normally mix drums a little bit louder,
Yeah.
but it's just like it's a different focus.
When the cello just gives that bottom end such a different tonal quality.
Right.
Really, because your bass is very rhythmic, with the cello has much more of that flow to it. So I'm sure that does change even how you write. Because if you're thinking, or certainly arranged, maybe not right, but how you're going to arrange it, because you're going to think, well, I can't really punch there the same way I would with a bass guitar, but the cello is going to add this different dimension that's going to take the song in a completely different direction, which I think is super, super cool. Like I was going to say that, we've got the black keys, we've got the white
Yeah.
stripes. There's lots of drum and guitar combos, but I don't know that I've ever heard a guitar and cello two piece.
There's
That's
not
an
a
unusual
lot. There's not a
combo.
lot of cello focused bands out there that aren't string quartets
Yeah.
or super. So no, that's exactly right. And you're right. Yeah, for arrangement, for sure. But even writing, every once in a while there'll be something we do where it's a bit of what you might call assignment writing. And in
Mhm.
those cases, yeah, I'll go to her first and say, hey, if we want something to have a certain fast thing going on, then what key
Yeah.
should it be in? Otherwise I'll write something and she'll be like, that's not the best key, but I'm a professional, no worries. But if it's something that's a little less like, oh, this song, just came to me and flowed through my finger, like we just wrote a theme song for a local business.
Okay.
So in that case, it was truly from scratch. I wasn't digging into ideas I already had. So in a case like
Yeah.
that, it's like, yeah, you think about it right from the get-go, that cello is going to be half of it, and let's make sure it's in a key where the stuff that we want to have happen is good and not a struggle.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
and even that stuff you don't think about necessarily until you've been doing what you do for a while. I know that my friend was saying, like, he would write horn lines sometimes, and the trumpet player would say, well, I can't. I mean, I could, but it's going to sound like crap. I can't play
Right.
those notes in that sequence, So
Yeah.
then you have to know what key they're in and the scales that they're more comfortable for trumpet players and trombone players. And
Exactly. And that's even more difficult. At least the cello is similar to the
it's
guitar in that it's
yeah,
all right there. You see it. You see what's happening. But trumpet, it's like if you're not pretty familiar with it, I'm sure you could very easily write something impossible. Yeah.
yeah. We could do on guitar too, but I was going to say with Awaken, then I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the lyrics because I'm always curious about, like you said, and this is a song that you'd had kicking around for a little while.
Yeah.
And as a lyricist myself, the germ of an idea is always interesting where that comes from. And I was wondering whether, because, sorry, I'm rambling here, but the cadence of the line, let's get out of town tonight. It's time you and I awaken. And I love the way that awaken is just two syllables and it punches the end of that line. So I was curious whether awaken was the start of the song and you built it out from it, or whether you were working with that line and awaken became the word that you used.
So yeah, Awaken is interesting in that the music came to me first, which is not unusual, but it's certainly extremely unusual the way that this music came to me, and I've had this happen exactly one time. In the song came to me in a dream, and it was myself and my family at a park, family barbecue kind of thing, and of course Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers are there. And Tom comes up to me and he kind of whispers in my ear, like, "Hey man, you want to hear a new song?" And I was like, "Yeah, that I
Yeah.
think I speak for everyone. That would be great." So, and then all of a sudden they were set up right there, the whole band. Um, and they played that song. They played that song. I mean, the chords, the flow of the guitar, the drum pattern, the hi-hats, and how that, like, I actually remembered all of that, and the vocal melody
Wow.
when I woke up and managed to, get to my cell phone or whatever. I can't remember anymore. This is a little bit ago. And preserve that. The thing that I didn't remember word for word was the lyrics, but I do remember they were very sort of tongue-in-cheek, kind of almost funny lyrics, but I couldn't put my finger on it. So I figured, well, I don't need to since I don't quite remember them, I'm not going to try and recreate that. I'm going to just say, okay, now I've got this music, and what does it say to me, like,
Yeah.
on the spot, without trying to reconjure something, and without, of course, trying to be imitative either, because it is in fact not a Tom Petty song, though I'm glad that he gave me this gift, and this is while he was still alive too. It's probably 10, 12 years ago maybe.
Right.
And I don't know, it just popped in there, but I will say that the pattern of the lyrics, like you point out, the way that awaken falls, that's all just like he sang it in the dream.
Wow.
That two-syllable thing. But the lyrics just sort of came to me very quickly. I don't know, it just, every once in a while it's not a struggle, and and it just, the concept of what the song was about, or maybe the word came to me first, I don't know, and it kind of just wrote itself. It's one of those songs. And then the bridge, that part was not part of the dream. So that's, I just thought it needed,
Yeah.
something else. I mean, as is, the song's only 2.5 minutes, I think. So yeah, without that part, it would probably clock in under 2. Yeah, it was a gift. What can I say? From Mr. Petty in my brain, and it just worked out. But at the same time, the band that I was in at the time was pretty alt rock, in that Pearl Jam, Stone Temple Pilots-y type of world, and it just didn't fit. It just didn't fit, and I wasn't gonna try and force it. So you just sort of, I recorded a demo, and I tabled it and said, "It'll have its time. I don't know when."
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and you said something interesting there, that you didn't want to be imitative, and I'd actually written that down. That I always like it when you can hear someone's influences and they're not afraid to let them out. But it's
Right.
exactly that. I'm trying to find where, because I'd written something down that I thought was a really good sentence. It's bugging me that I can't find it now. I write loads of notes, but it was exactly that. That it sounds kind of like a Tom Petty song, because you've got sort of the title line is the chorus essentially, which he did from time to time. It's got this really sort of hopeful, forward looking thing. That anywhere we land, we'll plant a new seed in that soul, I think is the line. So again, it's got that same thing that, I just covered King's Highway, which is the same type of song, right? It's the same kind of.
Right. That's exactly right.
Right. So it's got all the elements of a Petty song, but it sounds, because you have got a distinctive voice as well, and you've got this cello in, it definitely doesn't sound like you're trying to be Tom Petty, or you're trying to very overtly sound like someone. So to pull that off and to get all that right, all those moving pieces right, I think is always a trick. So, and I think you pulled it off handsomely.
Oh, well, thank you. And and the at the end of the day, you wouldn't do it and not pull it off. It would just be something that ended up never going anywhere. If it just was like, no, it's a ripoff, it's a Tom Petty ripoff, then I would never have done anything with it. Or if whether that's sonically, whether it's lyrically, whether it's anything vocally, so it would only see the light of day if it was like, okay, I think nobody's going to be like upset by this, and if anything, they'll say, "Oh, isn't that cool?" As opposed to, "Dude, you're a rip-off artist," So thank you, and I appreciate it, yeah.
And I love the nods in the video too, because obviously, the video starts, and I'm going to share this, folks, with my listeners. The video starts with you loading some records into a suitcase to head onto the road, and right on the top there is Full Moon Fever, which of course is a great traveling record. And then also in the video, there's another little nod with the telly, the cream-colored telly, which I always think of the Petty telly now, just because it's that, you know what I mean? It's so iconically him.
Right. That's right. And when we listen, there's a moment where I hit play and it's free falling on the stereo, and I wanted to be Running Down a Dream, but the title's too long, so it didn't show up all at once so I'm like, all right, well, we can't get too precious here. Free falling it is. But yeah, that's right. And the opening shot where we're playing in that abandoned parking lot, I was, going for the day before. Of course, everything happens the day before. So the day before, I'm in this thrift shop near our house, and with Damn the Torpedoes in my hands, and I'm like, okay, do you have anything like that? And I'm putting on all kinds of black, whatever it is, like sweater jackets, and none of them were just like, no, I can't find a single thing that looks just like. Now, if I had started a month before, I'd probably been able to. So didn't work out, so I just went with a black jean jacket over a red shirt and a Rickenbacker, and figured, all right, that's close enough, but not so close that anyone's probably going to notice that that's what I was trying for.
Okay, so the video then it's a lot of sort of scenes, right? You got and lots of different places. So how much time did you spend putting that together? Because obviously, to get that 5-second shot of you outside, this building with the big happy face on that it pans up, you've got to travel to all these different places. It must have been a ton of fun putting that together.
It's for me, the music part of anything is never the work. It's fun. And the video part, that's definitely more the work, because it's just not something that naturally comes to probably most musicians who aren't like actor musicians, which neither of us are, that's for sure. But fortunately, Mika is a videographer and a photographer, so she kind of handles all that. Even though she's on camera, she still manages to do the off-camera work as well. But most of that was filmed within 4 miles of our house here. Almost every shot is filmed in Pasadena, Arcadia, Glendora, all around the San Gabriel Valley here, which I don't think Petty ever lived in Pasadena, but at least he said the name Pasadena in a song once. So I mean, there's some credibility there, right? So that one shot is of the Elegant Farmer in Mukwonago, Wisconsin, where we were touring over the spring. So we played a show in Chicago, and then we went up and played a show in Lake Geneva, where we were getting a lot of radio play with Awaken. It was crazy. We found out that through a company out of Minneapolis that does radio promotions, they wrote us out of the blue, and they were like, hey, just wondering, like, who does your distribution or your management or whatever? How did you manage to get like a #1 song on the radio out here? And I was like, I think you have the wrong band, my friend. There's no way that. And then he's like, no, take a look at the charts. And sure enough, like, we were the most spun song, Awaken.
How cool is that?
In this radio station in Lake Geneva. Like, that's crazy. So, and Lake Geneva is a hop, skip, and a jump from my second home, as anyone who has anything to do with it says. I'm the music director of a summer camp. In Mukwonago, Wisconsin, just down the street from the Elegant Farmer with the happy face on the side of the building. I've been doing that for 19 years, called Bieber Camp. And so it was just crazy, yeah, that we were on the radio just, moments from summer camp. And we had borrowed a guitar or two from my summer camp for our tour. So we had
Okay.
stopped by to return it. And then, we had already started the video at that point. So I'm just like, I don't know, let's just get a quick selfie here. Maybe there's something to it because it's such a cheery building. But other than that, it's all filmed right here in our backyard, so to speak.
Well, that's super cool because it doesn't feel that way. It feels like there's space in there. And obviously, like, I mean, people who know the area would probably go, oh, yeah, that's here and that's that store and that's this part. But from
Right.
when you disconnected from it, it does feel like the Into the Great Wide Open, or it feels like there's space and there's dimension within that
Yeah,
video,
and
which
that's
is
the
super
great
cool.
thing about this area and LA in general too, is that there's just so many different things all in one
Yeah.
space. So yeah, like that, those beautiful lush gardens at the end is just like, 30 seconds from the train station, which is, and the abandoned tracks, which is just 10 minutes from that abandoned parking lot and, all this stuff.
Yeah.
So it's nice. And you kind of file things away in your mind when you know that you are in a band and probably going to make videos from time to time. You notice certain places where it's like, okay, I want to remember this.
Yeah.
Like that opening in that abandoned lot with that boarded up restaurant in the back. We said like, this is a good spot for something. We got to film here one day, and we did. And then not more than 6 months later, and we passed by, it's gone. The boarded up restaurant's been knocked down. So we scored on the timing with that one.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's funny, hey, because as a songwriter, especially if you're a lyricist, it is sometimes very visual, and something like that, even just something like that, you can think, oh, there's something about that.
Right.
I can use that. And it might not even be in a video. It might be just as a lyric. There might be a reference to it. Or it might evoke some sort of emotion or something. But
Yeah.
you take all of those things, right? And I think I always wonder what people think about how songs are written. And if you talk to some people, if you're not a musician, people have no idea, right? But it's like it never just comes from one place. It's that thing of being open to everything that's around you and just drawing what you need from any experience or a place or or even a melody or whatever it is. So I want to talk to you a little bit about then talking about those things.
Yeah.
Where did you grow up? What was your experience with music growing up? What sort of things were sort of permeating your brain as a young kid? Like, are you from Pasadena originally, or is Pasadena
No,
where you
I'm
moved
from
to?
Tucson, Arizona,
Oh, okay.
and Tucson, not a great music scene. It wasn't then. It's not now. I feel like it
Right.
could be. I feel like it should be, but it's not exactly. So like Mika, my better half, she grew up in Minneapolis, so
Okay.
she was going to see underground punk shows, this sort of
Yeah.
thing, with her siblings from the time she was very young. She was sneaking off to watch. Her mom pulled her out of school to go find a little perch to watch Purple Rain being filmed. They were doing some warehouse scene and they found out about it. So they were up on like a
Wow.
hill looking down, So she's a rock and roll junkie, but myself, not so much when it comes to just normal life. So but my big inspiration when I did decide, okay, I'm going to sit down at the piano and have let's see what this is all about. Definitely started out just learning every Doors song that I could. That was
Okay.
kind of my, and I do have a lot of older siblings, just like Mika does. They might not have been taking me to a lot of shows, but definitely I, inherited their vinyl collections and their
Yeah.
tastes in music and stuff like that. So that's, that was my first real rock band that like them and the Beatles, that were like really meant something to me. And so that was kind of my goal, was to try and figure out all those songs. And then, you start picking up more and more. And then I started playing in a band. It started out for a high school project.
Okay.
But then we stayed together for all those years in high school, and then we went our separate ways to some degree. But even just right now, I have texts from 2 days ago. We're trying to do some music online together, which
Yeah.
of course is easier and easier. So that's fun. But that's really what did it for. I mean, if I was not in a band in high school and it didn't mean something like it did, I would not have ended up a musician, and I would not have probably ended up an engineer. I don't think any of that would have happened. So just the influence that we had on each other, and really
Yeah.
caring and arguing over music, and compromising and all that is why I do what I do today, for sure.
And that's sort of a, the music's one thing, and having an ear, like music is innate to a certain degree, obviously. I mean, you can get better in the 10,000
Right.
hours, but that idea that people say, who are your influences? And people, when you just said, like, obviously the Beatles, but really, actually, and I find your influences are all your friends. The people who
Yeah.
brought music and say, hey, listen to this, check this out. Or, hey, I taped to tape, I recorded this on the radio. Have you heard the new X album, or this song? That's the stuff that really gets you excited, right? Because as a kid, that's your shared thing with your friends. And especially if it's a band that no one else is listening to.
Right.
For me, it was 10cc and Wishbone
Okay.
Ash. Those are the bands that I was listening to that none of my peers listened to. But me and my
Yeah.
buddy, that's what we bonded over. So I love that sort of that's your formative early experience, right? And I was gonna comment too that Tucson, Arizona, always makes me think of Paul Simon, because
Right.
because that's the first time I'd ever heard of it. I didn't know what it was. I was like, that's Tucson, Arizona. I think I want to live there one day.
Yeah, that's right. It doesn't show up in songs all that often, but that's right. Paul Simon, and and obviously the person he did that duet with on that mentions Tucson is Linda Ronstadt, who is
Yeah.
like, that's the pride of Tucson, Arizona, because there's just not a lot of artists who came out of Tucson. There's just not, there's plenty out of Phoenix, but Tucson, not so much.
How big a place is it?
I mean, it's, the whole metro area is getting close to 1 million people, so it's not small. But when my family moved out there, I was just a year old when they moved out there, and it was, of course, they do the whole, all of this used to just be desert, and now it's shopping malls, and isn't that the case everywhere, I suppose?
Yeah.
And then there's also, of course, let's not forget, JoJo left his home in Tucson, Arizona for some California grass, and McCartney did live in Tucson for a while, because Linda McCartney she's from Tucson, and she went to the University of Arizona, like I did, and they did have a house there.
Yeah, I didn't know she was from Tucson. That's cool.
Yeah, she got a degree in photography from Arizona. I can't swear she was born there, but she definitely went to college there and stayed there.
Do you ever find that, I was talking to a friend about this the other day, that when you're talking about, bands that you love or bands that are influential or whatever, you sort of just put the Beatles off to one side, because, well, of course, and you said it, of course, the Beatles. It's like, there's no point having a conversation about who's the best at this. But, well, it's the Beatles, and then we can have the conversation about everyone else. They were just that big, and not just culturally important, but I go back and listen to their songs again with a more critical ear, and you just think they really were that good. There's a reason why their music's lasted so long. There's a reason why people are still in love with it. It's because the core songs, apart from the Fab Four and Beatlemania and everything else that sort of surrounded it, the songs themselves were just so perfectly constructed.
Yeah, and it's like part of them knew somehow from the very beginning that they weren't going to be together that long, because they just evolved so quickly, as opposed to other bands that went through as many lives of sounds and but more more slowly. So yeah, no, that's exactly right. I don't think about them when someone says, who's your favorite bands? You set them aside. And
and obviously that was the same thing for Tom. And Tom says that, when the Beatles came, for a whole generation of kids, it was, well, we can do that. We can get 4 of us in a room and we can just thrash around and make a bunch of noise. We can do that. We can't do the big band stuff, or we can't do some of the, the country stuff that's really intricate with all the slide and the pedal steel and everything, but rock and roll we can do. So do you remember first hearing Petty then? Like, what are your first memories of Tom Petty sort of infiltrating your consciousness, and then you sort of growing appreciation for his music?
Yeah, it's like a lot of because I wasn't like a music nut from I have so many friends who are going to concerts when they were 6 years old, going to see Kiss, and like, and it just wasn't me. And I'd listen to the pop station, whatever the equivalent of top 40 is, where you are, or where I like. And I wouldn't be like, I got to go see this live, or I need to buy this album. It wasn't that at all. That's what you listen to. That's what's on in like class and stuff like that. So, I
Yeah.
mean, the first Petty song that I remember knowing was "Don't Come Around Here No More," but I didn't know who it was.
Right.
And in fact, it was years later that I put two and two together because it doesn't sound like him at all. So I was kind of shocked when I found out that, like, oh my God, that song is Petty. That's crazy.
Yeah.
But the first time that I sort of consciously was like, oh, here's Tom Petty, and there's his name and stuff, was just my buddy John in junior high had gotten Full Moon Fever on CD, and I think that the reason that he was like, oh, you got to hear this, it had nothing to do with the songs. It was that thing in the middle, the hello CD listeners, with the barn animal noises and stuff like that. That's what he's like, you got to hear this, man. But then I put, that's when I first put two and two together, the face, the name, and the fact that all those songs got massive play on the radio, Free Fallin' and so forth. And then, so I was like, okay, I like this, but I don't know what to do with that per se yet. Then the first time that I'm like, okay, I guess I'm going out and buying this album was Wildflowers, when it was just, it really hit, and that was at a time when someone like him, I remember that album, everything about it was made to feel like this is his middle-age album, the simple jeans and sitting down and the beard and all that. But that's not how it came across. I was a freshman or sophomore maybe, and it was popular. It was big in the dorm. It was not like it was like, oh, Grandpa Petty put out an album. It was a landmark record that people were into, and that got me more into him, and I guess I really became a fan at that point. But even before that, there's just something about the simplicity of what he does, the simplicity of his writing and his message, and it was so different from anything that people talk about influences, and no matter how much you like something, it doesn't, that's not what influence means. And so I didn't have a way to be influenced by Petty in high school. What we were doing in our band was just so radically different than that, and we were listening to much more prog rock types of stuff.
Okay.
That's the stuff that was influencing us more. We weren't a super simple band. But later on, when I started, and by the way, we were completely instrumental, so there was no vocals at all in our band.
Okay.
And then when I started realizing that I might not have a great voice, but I may as well use it, and started actually writing songs with lyrics and stuff like that, that's when it was like, okay, now Petty has become a big influence because he does so much with so little and cuts straight to the heart of things.
Yeah.
So and then it just, it got more and more. So before that, I was, a greatest hits fan.
Yeah.
But Wildflowers and on is when I would say I was a serious fan.
Do you think it's an interesting idea there? Because I've talked to other people about this again. I think, if you were there from the beginning, there's an urgency and immediacy about that first album. Of course, there is. Any rock and roll band making the first album is going to have a bit of energy. But he's an artist that, when you get to Wildflowers, now he's a songwriter's musician. You know what I mean? Like, he's got that thing where if you actually write songs and you make music professionally, you can sit and listen to that record and think, that's just a guy at the absolute tip top of the tree. You don't do it any better than that. And I think it really just changes. I think he's an artist that you need to spend time with, I think. And I think the older you get, the better Petty gets. I've always thought,
Yeah, and and I gotta say that the sound of Jeff Lynne isn't my favorite sound in the world. So I thought Wildflowers was a big statement. On top of that we're just going, back to rock and roll basics.
Yeah.
And but it didn't come across as back to roots. It didn't come across as like that kind of record. It was definitely a forward-looking thing, but going back to just a bigger raw or rock sound. That he kept exploring over time.
We should talk though. I mean, quickly about. Full Moon Fever did inspire a song for you, right? The title of that album. So you had a project. What's the project called?
The title trackers.
Title Trackers. There we go. I couldn't remember the name of the band. And so
Yeah.
just briefly, sort of explain to my listeners what that was about, because this is super cool.
Yeah, so I was in a band with, all the bands that I play with around here, we're all a little bit incestuous. I play bass for him and he plays guitar for me and he drums for, it's a lot of the same members. So a couple of my best friends in bands, they would joke from time to time about like how they would prank call each other and like, leave a voice message saying, "Hey man, I'm going to the Stones tonight. I can't wait to hear Exile on Main Street." and leaving the other person to think like, wait a minute, is that a song? Like, there's no title track on that record, is there? Like, and no, there's not. And so they would tell me these stupid stories and being like, putting on my producerly hat. I'm like, wait, this is a good idea. This has merit. We should do a whole record of these. And it seemed very silly until we recorded the first one, and then it's like, no, that's really good.
Yeah.
So let's keep going. So each of us would write and sing according to our strengths. So we're all petty guys, every one of us, but I have the most similar voice. So I wrote us. I figured, all right, let's write a title track to Damn the Torpedoes. So I wrote this song, just a chorus, and I played it for Dave, my bandmate, and he's like, this is great, but it's not Damn the Torpedoes. This should be Full Moon Fever. Like, you should rewrite the lyrics. So I'm like, oh, okay. And then, part of what we do is a sonic parody. Well, there's not a lot to sonically parody about Damn the Torpedoes. It's just a rock record. But the Jeff Lynne production of Full Moon Fever, that is highly parodyable. And so yeah, we wrote a song called Full Moon Fever, and with each song on the record, which are all we do one for the Doors, one for the Stones, one for the Clash. We changed the name just a little bit, for legal reasons. So it's Full Moon Fever gone to our heads, and I sung the vocal, and people have told me that I sound like Tom Petty for years, but I don't. I sound like myself. So we were going through vocal contortions to really do our best imitations on the Title Trackers record. So I did my very best Petty that I could muster and tried to, produce everything about the same. Now, I know Full Moon Fever is not all drum machines. I know that, but some of it is, and even if it's not, it sounds like it is. So it's just a drum machine loop. And we made it sound like it came off that record as much as we could. But at the same time, it was a parody project. It's for fun. But the litmus test is it, are these good songs? Because if not, we may as well scrap this thing. Yeah. And I think it's a great song. I think it's one of the best songs I've ever, written and I'd say the same thing of Awaken. And I'm not good at complimenting myself. So I really mean it. But that in the case of Full Moon Fever, of course, we were being overtly, we were showing our influences. To the maximum degree, as opposed to Awaken.
Well, it's got everything, right? Because it's got the really densely laid guitars, the big harmonies. It's got that sort of muted guitar tone from Won't Back Down. You've thrown all these little nods back into the album where it's like, yeah, that's clever. That's really, really good. Even down to like Mike Campbell's slide guitar tone. It's spot on. Like, you think, oh man, that's just so cool.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. And then when
a nice little sound effect in the middle too that I noticed.
That's right. Yes, the bong hit. Yeah. And then, when we were translating those songs live, some of them we did in costume, and some of them not. And the Petty one, we tried there isn't, he's just this is the Tom Petty costume. So what are you going to do? But we went for of course, the Don't Come Around Here No More Mad Hatter thing. Yeah. And it's just like, it was like costume shop stuff. And it's like, this is a little silly. We'd have to like spend a lot of time and money to get this looking really good. So we scrapped it. So that's one that we didn't do in costume for the most part. It's just a good song and a mid-tempo rocker and usually out of costume.
That's awesome, man. Yeah. I mean, like I said, I threw it because, and you sent me an email and gave me some of that info, and you do put those types of songs on with a little bit of trepidation because you think, oh man, if it's parody or is it, because a lot of them do suck. But like you said, the song itself it's got good, strong bones. So everything else around it says, well, I like that sound, I like that aesthetic. And it does Well, it sounds like Jeff Lynne, but a thicker. Because I do. That's my only criticism of Full Moon Fever, and I think maybe more so maybe into Great Wide Open, is it's just a wee bit thin on the bottom end. Where that the song that the Full Moon Fever gone to my head
Yeah,
isn't.
exactly. It's treble heavy production for sure.
Yeah,
But that's right. And we figured with the record, like the goal would be that if nobody had heard of any of these bands before, if someone from the South African jungle comes out and this is their first, that they would just be like, oh, that was good.
yeah,
They wouldn't have any idea it was parody. They wouldn't know it was funny. They wouldn't know anything. But the people who are huge fans, they're rolling on the floor laughing, as it were.
yeah,
So that was the mark we were trying to hit. Is if somebody who doesn't know who Tom Petty is doesn't just say like, "Oh, I like that song," or "I didn't like that song," then
yeah,
we've missed something. You don't want to be able to tell that it's funny unless you know.
yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So did you ever see Petty live then?
Yeah, so the first time I saw him live was the Wildflowers tour. A bunch of us,
Okay.
unfortunately, again with Tucson, Arizona, a lot of shows don't come through, even though we have plenty of people because Phoenix is so close. So we piled into whichever friend's minivan and went up and saw the Wildflowers tour in Phoenix in probably '95. And
Yeah.
I mean, I gotta say, I would credit that show with one of the best live shows I've ever seen, and like most people, I've seen a lot of live
Yeah.
shows. So, but the thing that struck me every time I saw him live is, I mean, I've um, I'm not the 1% like most of us, so the number of times that I've been in the first 10 rows for a concert is pretty much zero. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so we were way up in the lawn at Desert Sky Pavilion. And he just has this way of like, you might be, a football field away, but that he is just singing to you,
Yeah.
straight to you. And that really struck me. I hadn't
Yeah.
seen anyone live who quite had that magical thing that every person in that place, wherever they were sitting, I feel like was thinking the same thing, which is like,
Yeah.
they're speaking right to me.
He seems to have that. He does occupy that strange space of those artists who not only do we love the music, but fans of Tom Petty like Tom Petty as a person, and that connection does seem. I'm sure that other fanatics get it with their favorite artists, but Petty does seem special. There seems to be something there that just sets him apart a little bit from most other artists, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it's fun, harking back to Full Moon Fever, the character that I had in my mind for that song is not Petty himself. It was completely based on Lucky, his character
Yeah.
in King of the Hill,
Yeah.
which I think is probably half Petty and half something that Petty would laugh at and thinks is ridiculous. But yeah, there's just something. He's like an everyman kind of, like a lot of people. There's variations on what that is, and that they come across that way.
Yeah.
But I don't know. He occupies a particular space that nobody else does.
And obviously, then so you see him live, and you've got Petty, so that's one thing. You got the songs and there's Petty, but there's this band as well. I mean, the Heartbreakers as a band, and at this point, you've played lots of gigs yourself. You're music, some musician. How impressed were you with the Heartbreakers as a 5-piece? Or it would have been 6. Was it 6 then, or was
It
Scott?
probably was, yeah.
Yeah, I think
It was
Scott played on
probably
that.
6.
Yeah, no,
I
he
mean,
did play on that. Right, yeah.
yeah. I mean, listen, they're great, and they're not any more or less than they have to be. That's what it comes down to. I mean, and it really comes across as a band and not as
Yeah.
a solo artist with a backing band. And yeah, I mean, it's a sound. So you can't. I mean, you always say you can't picture it working with anybody else, but then that's not true. People leave, people pass away, and then what are they going to do? Just stop playing? Most of the time, the answer to that is no. And it's nice to be able to, you have the old and the new, and you see how people integrate. And just like the older that people get, it's just what it is. But you hope that person's influence is still playing into what,
Yeah.
what the people who take over are doing. I mean, if you listen to that new Stones record, you would put $100 down that it's Charlie Watts playing on
Yeah.
every track, but he's only on 2 or 3 tracks, and Steve Jordan just
Uh,
embodies, he interprets and
Yeah.
embodies what he does. And so I think the same is true of the Heartbreakers when a new member comes in for whatever reason. But yeah, I mean, Tom just was a consummate professional, and his band reflects that perfectly, and everyone occupies their space, and it all just fits together so beautifully.
Like you said, I mean, the only member I think that I don't know whether the Heartbreakers would have studied if Mike had ended up leaving or something happened there. I don't know if and especially because Tom and him wrote so closely and worked so closely. I
Right.
don't know if that one would have worked. But everyone else, like you said, I mean, they replace Stan Lynch with Steve Ferrone, who is just a god level drummer.
Yeah.
They replaced, Howie came in and replaced Ron, then Ron replaced Howie. But then you've got at the core is this band that can play pretty much anything at the drop of a hat, it seems. And then they end up going on tour with Dylan, and you'd written and told me that you do play the Dylan Fest in the South Bay every year. And so how much of a joy is that when you get to play Dylan songs? And then, I think you said you do background vocals on Jamming Me. So you still manage to get a little bit of Petty in there.
Yeah, that's right. It's sort of cheating. But there's one band that I play with. Again, it's all the same people that are in all my bands, because it just is. It's just with a different name. Dry September, that every year for many years does Jammin' Me and Wanted Man by Johnny Cash. Now the rule is you can't play anything that's not Dylan, that Dylan didn't write, but that's 2 co-writes for other artists. So it's a bit of a cheat, but yeah, it is definitely fun to throw a little variety in there, because there's a lot of Dylan purists there, and there's it's an 8-hour show, 8 hours of Dylan songs. So anything you can do to sort of throw in a little bit of a curveball is a good thing. Yeah. But yes, it is fun to stand in Mike Campbell's shoes. Well, for the guitar, I guess backing vocals would probably be Howie Epstein. Yeah. Back in the and play that one, which is obviously a bit more of a straight up rocker than Dylan tends to have in his catalog. I mean, he's got a couple, but
yeah.
And
I'm a huge Dylan fan too. I mean, I think Highway 61 Revisited might be, I wouldn't say the best album ever written, but it's certainly in that same conversation, because it just, again, as a lyricist, you think, where the hell does this come from? The sun's not yellow, it's chicken. What? How do you write that line down and then think, yeah, that's a good line, I'll leave that in the song? It's insane, that album to me,
Right. And where does it come from? And I think, the answer is he doesn't know either. Famously, when he was interviewed in whatever it was, the mid 90s or early 2000s on 60 Minutes or whatever, and he was asked, can you still do that? Can you write like that? And he said no.
Yeah.
Because he's not, your muse changes over time, and your antenna or whatever you would call it. And he was honest in that, no, he can't do that anymore. So he probably doesn't know where it came from.
But I don't think you would want Dylan to either, right? Because Dylan is a chameleon, and he does go through all these different skins and sort of changes the way he sounds and the types of music he's writing. And 61 and Blonde on Blonde are just this rich period, like, Wildflowers, She's the One. It's that same period where you just get into this groove where it's just flowing out of you. So get as much of it down as you possibly can.
Yeah, that's right. And yeah, now, I mean, the records he puts out, they're a little strange. They're a little, but yeah, I mean, at least he's not striving for glory days. That's what you, I guess, want to avoid, is forced glory days. I mean, there are people who just do something and then they never lose that. They get a career out of the Stones being, in that category, I think. Totally. And then there's the people who really do, have a spectrum of change over the course of a career.
Yeah, you look at the last two albums in Petty's catalog, Mojo and Hypnotic Eye. I mean, what a pair of albums to be able to release late career when,
Yeah,
like you said, most artists then just drift into greatest hits mode. We'll put a record out every 3-4 years just so we can get out on tour and we can tour some stuff. But it's those two albums I always say on this podcast is, especially Hypnotic Eye, is an artist that's still, the trajectory is still up. You know, he's not run out of ideas yet. He's not run out of different ways to express what he thinks, what he feels, what he has to say.
that's right. And I think he just had a work ethic. Like I think
Yep.
he thought of music as his job and himself as an employer, as much as the art. The artistic side of it is one thing, and
Yep.
then just the like. This is what I do. I don't think he's ever someone who would go into hermit mode,
Right.
because it's just, I don't think that was his work ethic. And I know, a lot of the members of the Heartbreakers, I saw in interviews, the reason that they were so quickly back out on the road with other artists is just like, that's what Tom instilled in us.
Yeah.
You get out there and you work.
Yeah.
So
It's the, and I always, the ethos to live by is take what you do seriously, never take yourself seriously. And I think that take what you do seriously, that is that work ethic.
yeah,
Right. That is that part of, this is a job, and we get on stage and we do the best show we can possibly do every single night because people have paid.
yeah,
I'm sick of playing Refugee, but people want to hear it. Or I don't really want to play American Girl for the 10,000th time, but
right.
these fine people are taking, they've got babysitters, so, and that sense of professionalism is the thing that, again, as an older as I get older in my life, I appreciate that more and more and more and more, because you do see bands kicking off and having little hissy fits on stage, and like Royal Blood, I don't know if you saw that whole thing that they did on Royal Blood, and they had this thing about, you guys suck, you're not a rock and roll audience. Like, dude, just, you're being paid, play your songs and do your job, so
Yeah, yeah. And, and if you get bored, do something different, because you always have that option. Like we went to see The Who a few years back, and obviously everyone's waiting for the won't get fooled again to kick in. But it was with an orchestra, and they needed a break. The union breaks because they're touring with an orchestra. So they were just like, well, we're gonna do that song, just the two of us, acoustic. And the band takes a break. So
that must have been cool, though.
Oh, it was awesome. Yeah.
Yeah.
To like complete any disappointment is gone within the first 10 seconds.
Yeah.
And with American Girl, I don't know if Petty ever did a version of American Girl that's like what Campbell and Tench did after Petty died, that plaintive piano version. And I just saw Benmont Tench solo here in LA, and he closed. He didn't do any Petty songs, just the encore was American Girl, just like that really slow, like lump in the throat voice kind of thing. And it's like, yeah, you would never think of arranging that song that way. But like so many good songs, it's the song. It'll work. It'll
100%.
work. You do it any number of different ways, it's gonna work. And it's just a very emotional version of a song that I never considered emotional. It's like a roll the windows down song, and and rock out. But like the impacts when you hear it a different way is significant.
That was Benmont, because I think, Mike and the Dirty Knobs, they're just a down and dirty rock and roll band, and I really hope they come through Canada at some point. Benmont's an entirely different proposition, obviously, because he's a monster musician, can play anything with keys, brilliant keyboardist, but you don't necessarily think of Benmont Tench and live show. I don't think a solo. So how was it?
It was very enjoyable. I mean, it just seems like your uncle in his living room kind of vibe. Just he was very personable and sort of just chit chatty and silly, and he had some lyrics for one of the songs, and he's like, oh, I didn't want to put on the reading glasses, but I'm gonna fuck it up otherwise. So does that, and he just sat at the piano and did his thing, some instrumental stuff, some vocal stuff. He sings great. Some stuff from the records he's put out, or stuff that he wants to put out, and I mean, it was very enjoyable. It was, and it's as tiny as this club Largo in LA. That's like your uncle's living room type of vibe. It's almost a black box theater kind of thing. It's not very big. The acoustics are incredible, and it was cool. Yeah, just like this old upright piano, and it was fun.
Yeah. I think that's that thing of, I think you mentioned this earlier, right? With production and that kind of stuff. It doesn't, I mean, if it's an old upright piano or it's a little Casio tone keyboard or it's a Steinway Grand, it's the fingers that are playing it that really make the difference. And when those fingers are attached to Benmont Tench, it's going to be amazing.
Yeah, exactly. Plus, when you're a professional, I mean, obviously I've seen him there before too. He joined John Bryan for half of a show that I saw at Largo years ago. This is the first time I've seen him just by himself. But I'm sure he's familiar with that piano, and if it wasn't going to do the trick, he would rent the right piano and he would bring it in. Like that's what, like you.
Yeah.
Part of being great all the time is doing the groundwork to know that you have the best chance of being great all the time. So, part of the illusion of just like it was perfect is making sure that it's perfect.
Yeah. Being well rehearsed. And it's that thing of going to the room first. Just go and have a quick look at the room so that you get a sense of, they're not going to be, they need to see, or that whole thing of, again, it just comes down to professionalism, I guess. Okay, so before we get into my 10 questions, Russell, I wanted to ask you about Steve Ferrone's 60th birthday party. You mentioned that you...
Oh, yeah, that's right. So for almost since I moved to LA, I've been working as a engineer, live show production manager, stage manager, associate producer of records for David Pack, who is the singer of Ambrosia.
Okay.
Or was. He was a founding member of Ambrosia. He wrote all their biggest hits, and he hasn't played with them live in many years. He does his own thing. But he's friends with Ferrone.
Okay.
So I'd met him once or twice because he joined David on stage for a song or two here and there at various different things. But David was going to go to he was having a 60th birthday party at I think it was his house in the Valley. And David asked me, "Hey, are you around that night?" And I'm like, "I will make myself around that night." Yes. So yeah. And then they played, there's just a big band of just various hooligans that played, and so yeah, that was fun. And then interestingly, on April 1st of 2020, I and David and his band were supposed to set sail on a cruise, one of those rock and roll cruises out of Florida, and it was like David and a couple other guys who have some big hits that play together, and they alternate their hits and stuff like that with all-star backing band kind of thing. And Ferrone was actually the drummer. He was going to be the drummer.
Oh, wow.
And he hadn't played one of those types of shows with David before. So probably in February, I went out. Steve, he was playing at this coffee shop, Jones Coffee Roasters here in Pasadena. Like just this little cool coffee shop. That's what's great about LA, right? Is you can walk into a coffee shop at 9 a.m. on a Wednesday, and there's a Rock and Roll Hall of Fame drummer sitting there playing with his jazz combo. Like it's a fun time. So I went to meet him there, and then he said, "Okay, why don't you come back to my studio because we can rehearse there for the show." So I went back and just he showed me what mics he had and what the PA was and the wedges and I took pictures of the room so that I could report back and figure out if we needed to bring in, what amps we needed to bring in for the rehearsal and stuff like that. Right. Needless to say, that rehearsal never happened. And that cruise never happened. And womp womp. But anyway, he's a great guy. Just a very soft-spoken British,
Yeah.
Yeah.
And just the same with I think maybe it is if you're a musician, if music isn't just a hobby, like Steve Ferrone just loves playing. That comes across all the time because he's done, he's been up on stage with Petty Theft tribute band in San Francisco.
Right.
He'll get up on stage with, he did the thing with Jake Thistle at the first birthday bash. He just loves playing. And I think that sense of the joy of music always just radiates from Steve Ferrone. Anytime I've seen him interviewed, anytime I've seen him play, you can tell that he's having fun.
Yeah, and I'm sure that he, it was just a scheduling conflict. I imagine that he wasn't playing with the Dirty Knobs at first. I
Yeah.
saw actually the Dirty Knobs open for the Who, so that's where I saw them. Was at the
Oh,
Hollywood
okay. Yeah,
Bowl,
yeah.
but it wasn't Ferrone at that time on drums. It was Matt Log, I think.
Yeah.
So I haven't seen them with Ferrone, but it just makes sense that he'd be playing with them. Like
Yeah.
why not? It's
I
fun.
love him.
And it's your work. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
But hey, I mean, listen, that 60th birthday party was a lot more than 10 years ago. So Ferrone could very easily, like so many of these people in rock and roll today, very easily just be retired.
Yeah.
But it's just that's not in their blood.
What are you going to do? Was he going to sit around? Was he going to golf? Like, no, he wants to play drums, and that's just keep playing until you drop, man. I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, that's a great place to finish. Where can people find your music? Let's tell people where they can get to you.
So the next door here for hello video watchers. There's so the Nextdoors is my current project with my wife that we talked a fair bit about. Our debut record is called Linda Vista, and it is available everywhere that you consume your music. The Spotify's, the Apple Music's, all that. But and Bandcamp, etc. We do have CDs for sale as well. You can go to nextdoorsmusic.com. Nextdoorsmusic.com, and then you can find links to everything that you need links to and all that good stuff. Thetitletrackers.com, you can see a little bit more about that.
Yeah.
And then for my own personal, bands, productions, all that good stuff, it's highwheelentertainment.com.
Okay.
That's high without a GH. So just HI wheelentertainment.com. And then in terms of Nextdoors, we did tour a little bit behind our record. We just put out a video for Awaken that we talked about earlier. We're working on a video right now for the song All Right Here on our record, and we are thinking about album number 2 and doing some demoing and stuff like that. So that'll probably be a 2024 thing. So that's what we're up to at the moment.
Fantastic. And all those links, folks, will be in the episode notes. So please do go make sure you go check that out. And again, if you are going to go anywhere, go to Bandcamp, because you can send some money, and that goes, almost all of that goes to the artist, where Spotify and Apple, as we know, pays absolutely peanuts. And you can get an album on Bandcamp for a really good price. So consider, if you've got a few bucks, go spend some money for an indie artist. It makes a massive difference.
That's right. And that doesn't mean that you need to not listen on Spotify, because yes, that's very convenient. But and this goes with any artist, of course, just buy the record if you can, and then listen to it on Spotify and Apple Music and whatever is convenient. But yes, it is appreciated. And we did put out our album on Bandcamp about a month before we put it out on streaming. And, people are very, very happy to buy it and to pre-purchase and to support. And,
absolutely.
And that's nice.
And I think, if you're into Tom Petty, which if you listen to this podcast, chances are you probably are. I think you will like the songs that Russell writes. Again, I think simplicity is a watchword. You were talking about your voice, but I really like your voice. So it's enough like Petty in times that you can find an angle to get into it, but it's very distinctly and uniquely yours. The album's fantastic. And so, go check all that stuff out. And I'll be back with you next week to talk about, whatever it is. I'm not too sure when I'm scheduling this. And Russell, I'll let you know so we can connect social media. But I'm going to share the video for Awaken this week and just tease people that we've been chatting. So thanks so much for taking time out to talk to me. It's been a blast.
Oh, super appreciate it. The great thing that, like everything, including Spotify, social media has its ups and downs, but the ability to just reach out and say hey and connect from across international borders and all that is the great and glorious side of social media. So thank you, and this has been a lot of fun.
Awesome, man. Well, you enjoy your trip. Safe travels.
Thank you. We'll do it. We'll see you next time.
You bet, man. Thanks so much.